In this video, we are covering the push. And the push is one of the 8 fundamental or foundational movements. And in a prior video, we talked about the squat. And you could think about the squat as the lower body pushing exercise. So if I'm here, I'm down and I'm pushing the weight up, that's lower body push. Upper body push is going to be a military press. So push and press are often thought of synonymously. So if I'm doing military press or a bench press, push-up exercise, even a overhead tricep press, all of those are examples of upper extremity pressing movements. And it's a foundational movement pattern because anytime we need to lift something overhead or push open a door, push something shut, all of those pushing actions are very important. It's a necessary component of many daily activities. So we're going to be reviewing the form for pushing, different variations, and then how can we break down that movement, or how can we train and prime and prepare for that movement to make sure that you yourself are strong with pushing motions, and then also that you can train it appropriately with your clients. So when pushing, I just talked about the squat as a lower extremity push. Well, then the foundational movement also for an upper extremity push is really going to be a strong core position. So kind of that plank setup that I can use to then push. One of the most common misconceptions that I see with pushing stuff is they'll arch their back as they push up. So they lock out their back, and we lose a lot of trunk stability if you're overextending through the spine there. The other postural thing that is very common and a reason that people have shoulder pain is that when they push, they do it from this starting position. So they're pushing from here, and that ends up all in the top of the shoulder. And that is because they lack thoracic mobility, or they lack CT junction mobility, the ability to open up the shoulders to then do that pressing action. So proper form on it, I want you to think about your core position, core drawn in and up, almost like a plank sort of form as the starting point. And then if we're doing a military press, for example, the ability to drop that shoulder back as the starting position, having a solid starting position is key, because then as you push up, you can push all from here. So oftentimes if someone is pushing, they'll push up like that, where the shoulder rises. They use too much upper trap, so they push like that. We need to be able to lock that starting position kind of down and back. I think about it as hugging the armpit, if someone squeezing the hand underneath, and that action of shoulder external rotation coupled with a posterior tilt of the scapula, that position locks the shoulder blade into place, creates external rotation torque through the rotator cuff, and then gives you a solid platform to push from in different variations. So think about it again as proper form is strong core position, being able to lock the shoulders back. You see how if I'm here, I can't lock back. Chest up, core in allows the shoulders to get back into position to then press up. So what are our different variations that we can talk about with the pushing movement? Well, first of all, we can do one arm versus two arms. So if I'm doing a barbell, both arms need to lock into position. That is going to require even better setup of upper core strength, holding the ribs in as I get there. And it's also going to have more thoracic extension, because to reach all the way up overhead, I need more thoracic extension if both arms are going versus just one arm at a time. So that's a consideration of one arm versus two arms. Now, what are some of our other pushing variations? Well, first and foremost, the push up is the easiest one. And that's the most easy to remember because push is literally in the word of it. So from a push up, assuming the plank position, core in, hips slightly under, shoulder blades slightly down, I drop into that position and then push back up. To do that, I think about screwing my hands into the ground. So my left hand, I screw counterclockwise, the right hand I screw clockwise, and from the back you can see I draws the shoulders down instead of here. If you lose that activation as you go down into the push-up, the shoulders come up like that. It creates a lot of tension across the front of the bicep, or it loads the back of the shoulder in a funny way, it loads the upper trap and the side of the neck. That's probably the most common misconception, or most common form in air form, whatever you want to call it, during a pushing movement, especially the push-up. Now, so we can do a push-up. If you flip that around, you could do a kettlebell Turkish get-up type of movement. So here I'm holding the press, holding the push. So it's an isometric way to hold that press action. And if you don't like that version of it, you could start on your back even with a medicine ball and doing medicine ball pushes. Anything that's going to keep your core strong as you're doing that pushing action is a great way to, it's a variation, but a good way to practice this. We've covered bench press and military press as two of the biggest pushing actions. And then lastly, a tricep overhead press. So if I'm here, the arms drop down, I'm pushing that weight overhead. And you can see how the triceps and the pecs and the deltoid, they work together. On a bench press, I'm here, I push forward, I'm using chest, I'm using anterior deltoid, and I'm using rotator cuff to stabilize. On a military press, rotator cuff locks into position, I engage from there, and then I push deltoid and tricep. The action of what's happening here with the pressing action through the tricep, those things are synchronous movements, or they need to happen almost all the time. They happen together. As the chest presses, the arm extends. This works with this. So those are many of the common variations that we have with our pressing movements. Now, how can we break this down? What are the components of the push that if we, let's say you're having pain or you're having trouble getting into the full pushing movement, how can we make that easier? Well, one, we should clear neck and shoulder range of motion. So if it hurts to push overhead, what I would want to see is, can the person drop their head down? Especially, can they look back? Can they rotate left? Can they rotate right? Do they have full range of motion really without any pain? If they get a fairly sharp compression as they look to the left and to the right, or side bend one way and another, they're most likely going to have some trouble loading that pattern. So we need to make sure that the cervical spine or neck is cleared. And then I want to make sure that shoulder range of motion is full. So from the side, can they get their arms either behind or in line with their ear while staying stacked from here? Many times people will end up here. Well, loading that position is not healthy, or it's not a strong position in the shoulder. And then the other way is they cheat through their body where they lose the stacked position of their spine. And then you're loading your body through one area of the spine versus maintaining a strong stacked core position. So having good shoulder range of motion, having good neck range of motion, and also I didn't say that shoulder external rotation needs to be 90-92 or even a little bit more. If someone's external rotation is about here, where they're having to push up there, again, we need that shoulder to get back more so they can stack to then load the movement overhead. If you're lacking those are going to be some of your fundamental requirements that you need for a strong push or a strong press. So we covered shoulder and neck range of motion. Next, I want to make sure that the scaps can sort of set into position. And a great way to prep that is to go from quadruped into, let's say, forearms and knees for a push-up type position, and then eventually into a knees push-up, kneeling push-up. So starting off, quadruped, I want to make sure that the person can draw their shoulder blades down their back, that they can push through their shoulder blades so they can use the serratus to help with scapular protraction and posterior tilt. So that's a simple thing to practice in quadruped, just drawing the shoulders down and locking into that position. As I do that, I feel it working right here, mimicking the action, that pressing action that needs to happen. So I'll start that in quadruped, and then I'll often from there go into, can they hold a plank position? If they can hold a plank, fine. I'll drop down to the knees, and then we'll start working on pushing from a kneeling position. Again, think about the push-up as a plank in motion. The plank is also a foundational movement, so now we're just adding a pressing action to it. So we talked about shoulder, neck, quadruped, into a push-up from the knees. I also want to make sure that I have good thoracic extension because again, to get all the way overhead, the middle back needs to be able to move. I'll work on that with both a cat-cow, so here, rounding all the way up, and then dropping down there, really focusing on getting that compression through the middle back. I want to make sure that I'm able to move the middle back from a strong core position. And then lastly, using the foam roller, I'll work on arching over it, strong core, reaching back, and then back up. Reaching back, and back up. And what that does is it trains the body to hold a strong thoracic extension as you're holding a weight overhead. Now, all of these things are the broken down components to get into a pressing movement. So you need to have good neck range of motion, shoulder range of motion, scap stability, holding a plank form to then do your stronger military press and bench press. So this whole video has been an overview of the importance of pushing, or also known as pressing type of movements. And as you get into that, we're also going to cover the pull movement, and we're going to get into rotation and gait or walking next. So when you think about your push, I want you to think about the proper form. I want you to think about 1 and 2 arm variations. And then lastly, if you're having issues with it, how can you break down that movement and practice the components? So go do some bench press, go practice some military press, see how these pushing movements feel.